In today's video, I continue my journey through the Tribunal expansion featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Last time, I was attacked by a Dark Brotherhood assassin and sent to the city of Mournhold. From there, I tracked their base to the sewers. Upon killing their leader, I discovered that the newly appointed King Helseth tried to have me assassinated. Confronting the captain of the guard with this information, he sent me on a series of quests to learn more about the current political climate within Mournhold. After completing everything for Tienius, I met with the steward of Almalexia named Fedris Halur. Fedris sent me on a mission to eradicate Helseth's goblin army deep within the sewers. Once that was said and done, he sent me to someone named Gavis Drin. Drin tasked me with escorting Urvel Dolny to an abandoned temple shrine in order to cleanse it. This is where the journey continues. Asking Gavis Drin about being of service to Almalexia, he directs me back over to Fedris. Fedris, thinking for a bit, comes up with a way in which I can aid the temple. Earlier that day, Almalexia asked Fedris to retrieve a powerful artifact called Barilzar's Mazed Band. The band is located beneath the temple. In the northwestern section, I'll find the abandoned crypt, which was previously blocked off by some rocks. He says that if I really wish to know more about it, I should go and speak with Gavis. Entertaining the idea, Gavis doesn't elaborate too much further. He does mention a little bit about Barilzar and that he was once a very powerful mage. The band was crafted in the Second Era and hasn't been seen since. He's ultimately unsure of what it's used for though. Quickly leaving the temple, I paid a visit to Darren in the Great Bazaar. Dropping off some of my items and getting others repaired, I then returned back to the Holy Ground and descended to the basement. Taking the hatch leading down into the temple sewers, I was immediately met by a pair of Bone Lords, but certainly nothing that I couldn't handle. Last time, I didn't really venture too far into this section of the sewers, so I followed the map to the crossroads section and went left, wondering if it would lead me to the northwest entrance. The only enemies that I needed to face here were simple spirits and the odd skeleton, so for the most part smooth sailing. Eventually, I arrived at a rocky area. I assumed this to be the entrance into the abandoned crypt, as it seemed like the rocks were once covering the door. Luckily, the nameplate confirmed my suspicion, and I was one step closer to finding the band. In this zone, I came across more profane acolytes. For the most part, they used the same attacks as the ones from the temple shrine. Their shock spells were easy enough to dodge, and even when they hit, felt weaker than before. There were also some rats scattered around, which only made it a nuisance for the rest and heal method. Also throughout the zone, there were a lot of ladders leading deeper into the abandoned crypt. I wasn't sure if these were sections I needed to go into or not, so I decided to just further explore this zone. Coming across a few more profane acolytes, as well as rats, I soon wandered into a little nook that contained a unique NPC. Getting in close, it turned out to be the legendary Barilzar himself, but in the form of a lich. He warned me that the mazed band must not leave the tomb, as it will destroy the hearts and minds of mortals. He says it should have never existed to begin with, and that it's his burden to bear for the rest of eternity. At the end, Barilzar says that any who challenge him will pay with their life, and the fight begins. I cast my most powerful shock spell on him, which lowers his health by a good bit. I was then able to lunge in with my spear and repeatedly thrust at him. His attacks were really easy to predict, he moved fairly slowly, and his health dropped really quickly. Before I knew it, Barilzar was dead and I was able to retrieve his band. I noticed too that he had a Daedric Claymore in his inventory, and I wanted it really bad. So I made a bit of a gear swap with him, and it just barely fit with my weight capacity. Soon, I'd like to experiment and branch off to another weapon type. Claymores and two-handed weapons are definitely up there as prospects. Both items in hand, I exited the sewers, rested up in the infirmary, and decided to bring the claymore back to the old stomping ground. I spoke with Efte in the Royal Palace reception area, and he sent me back to Vardenfell. I know I've only been away from it for a couple of real-life hours, but for some reason it felt surreal and almost nostalgic coming back to it. The one thing I didn't miss was needing to use external services in order to quickly travel to different parts of the island. Obviously, the bigger space is more elaborate and immersive for gameplay, but in Mournhold, it's nice to be able to run and get to your desired location in a matter of seconds. I dropped off my claymore in Caius' home, reminiscing of the old skooma addict. It is really interesting and kind of comical that he only played a small part in my journey to becoming Nerevarine. Yet, his impact and lasting impression left on my character feels like he was there all the way up until the end. Returning back to Mournhold and ultimately Fedris, he says that he won't take the ring and directs me over to Gavis. Gavis is ecstatic that the band has been found and says that Almalexia will want it immediately. He tells me that I'm the one who needs to bring it to her. I was actually really excited to get to speak with the quote-unquote goddess. First, getting to meet Vivek and then Almalexia. Now all I need is to meet with Sotha Sil. Entering inside of the High Chapel, I see the lady herself, surrounded by a bunch of High Ordinators. Definitely a different scene than when first speaking with Vivek.
What may I do for you, my child?
Almalexia welcomes me to her chapel and says she's heard a lot about me. She appears to almost call me Lord Nerevar, but doesn't venture that far. She appreciates the services I've been doing for her and wishes to discuss Barilzar's mazed band. She's fascinated by it, saying that there's more to the ring than meets the eye. Almalexia says the ring needs to be reawakened, and I'm given the options of 2 prompts. One is to hand it over, no questions asked, and the other is to question why she wants the ring. Out of intrigue, I choose the latter, and Almalexia responds by saying that I shouldn't concern myself with that. The ring will be used to serve the temple in Morrowind. Before dismissal, she bestows the blessing of her light upon me. Out of curiosity, I asked about Sotha Sil, and she gives me the same response that Vivek gave in regards to the rest of the Tribunal. She hasn't really been in contact with him, but is sure he's doing well. Almalexia's blessing turns out to be an incredibly powerful one. It restores 25 points to all 8 attributes. With that, thus ends the quest, Barilzar's Mazed Band. Exiting the High Chapel and returning to Fedris, I asked if there was anything else I could do for the temple. He said to check back in a bit, as there was nothing at the current moment. So far, I'm really enjoying my experience playing through this expansion. I find Mournhold to be incredibly charming, and I actually like how there isn't too much of it to explore. I think I feel this way mainly because there's still so much for me to do and see back on Vvardenfell. Not to mention, I still have the whole island of Solstheim to look into as well. But for the most part, I've really enjoyed the story and the whole setup for things to come. It felt like there was some crazy foreshadowing going on with Barilzar, claiming the ring to be a source of evil. I'm assuming it was originally hidden away for a reason, and I'm really excited to see how everything plays out. From here, it took me a while to realize that the preceding events occur after a 24-hour period. So, forcing a wait, I went and spoke with the nearest High Ordinator. He was hysterical in telling me that the city was under attack. Enchanted machines, as he calls them, have flooded into Plaza Brindisi-Dorum and are killing everyone there. Spear in hand, I rushed over and laid eyes on the attacker. The palace guards and ordinators were defending the zone well, but these creatures were abundant. They looked half monster, half machine. It was hard to get hits in, as Mournhold's defense was all over the place. Guards were constantly wandering in front of me, strafing, dodging, and lunging in for the attack. Luckily though, these abominations were pretty weak and didn't hit for a lot of health. I didn't know if there was a power difference between the scorpion-looking ones and the dinosaur-looking ones, but given their size and build, I assumed the scorpions were slightly tougher. Soon, all of the creatures were defeated, and I learned that they were called Fabricants. The verminous Fabricants, or dinosaur-looking ones, carried an elixir that fortifies speed for 10 points for 10 seconds. I took as many as I could in case I would need them in a hairy situation. I noticed too that the statue of Almalexia and Mehrunes Dagon was completely broken and destroyed. Definitely an act of war against Mournhold. Speaking to another High Ordinator, they said that this should be reported to Fedris immediately. Fedris said it's good that I came to him and says that he sent some Ordinators to deal with the rest of the situation. He then says that there's another way in which I could help the city. Similar to Hunt the Dark Brotherhood, depending on whom you speak with, you'll either get sent to Fedris or to Tienius. I decided to go with the Royal Palace Guard for this one, as I felt like I wanted to experience more of this world through them. With that, thus ends the quest, an attack on Mournhold. Speaking with Tienys, he says the same piece of dialogue as Fedris, and I inquired about how I could be of further assistance. Tienys asks me to investigate the disturbance. The attacks likely originated from a Dwemer ruin that sits deep beneath Mournhold. Coincidentally, a passageway down into the ruin was created after the attack, and the entrance sits in the rubble of the memorial statue. I'm to report back if these creatures were Dwemer in origin and exactly where they came from. Going back to Plaza Brindisidorum, I went up to the memorial and descended down into the ruins of Bamz-Amschend. It brought me to a natural tunnel, and at the other side of it was an overlook into the Hearthfire Hall. I could hear the sounds of battle all the way from the ladder, and upon closer inspection, it appears as though the fabricants were fighting against Dwemer machines. It was cool to see the Dwemer Centurions in action. The Spheres and Steam Centurions were battling against the hulking and verminous fabricants. Technically, as soon as I witnessed the scene, I got a journal update saying that I could now leave and report back to Tienys. My curiosity got the better of me though, and I stayed to watch the battle through. This eventually backfired as one of the Centurions from below targeted and killed me. Rewatching the fight over, I waited until a winner emerged and then hopped on down to do some cleanup. All I had to battle against was a sphere, and then I snooped around for a bit. I found the Hearthfire Hall to be really fascinating. It looked different to most other sections of Dwemer ruins that I've been in. There were two other zones connected to this one. One led to a place called the Passage of Whispers, and the other led to the Hall of Winds. Deciding it was time to leave, I climbed back up to the hole in the wall and ascended back up to the plaza. Returning to Tienys in the throne room, I was surprised to see that King Helsith was standing next to him. I was pretty excited to speak with him, but first gave my report to the captain. He found the news disturbing that the fabricants were battling against the Dwemer machines. He ultimately appreciates my efforts though, and tells me it's finally time to meet with King Helsith. With that, thus ends the quest, investigate Bamz-Amschend. Approaching the king, he comes out of the gate apologizing for the assassination attempt. He says that they were misinformed and that Barilzar vouched for me. Apparently, they have multiple sources in Vvardenfell, and one of their informants suggested that I would pose as a threat to the monarchy. Again, I'm assuming this was due to my Nerevarine status. Helsith mentions that he's receiving a lot of negative attention, especially due to the unfortunate passing of King Lethin. He states that they did as much as they could for him, and that in the end, he seemed to give up on life. As a side note, I just have to say that I love this cheeky piece of dialogue. Anyways, he says there are many who want to cause civil unrest, and few who even want Helsith dead. Going further, he remarks that having others trying to kill you in the name of someone else is a feeling I could likely relate to. In fact, the palace has recently discovered a new plot against the throne. Some of his informants have apparently caught wind of a potential plot against someone in the royal family, and he asks me to look into it. I'm to meet with an orc informant at the Wing Gwar and use the secret code by asking him about his uncle's farm. Before doing so, I made a quick pit stop in the infirmary, as I've since learned that it's a free space within the city to rest without it being a crime. From there, I traveled over to God's Reach and entered inside of the tavern. Descending to the lower level, I laid eyes on the only orc present. Speaking with Bak Grosham, I asked about his uncle's farm, to which he shoots me down immediately. He says that he doesn't have an uncle, and that he doesn't even know who I am. Disappointed about what has to happen next, I equip the Amulet of Verbosity and boost my speechcraft, thinking that could help me out here. I then started to chuck a couple pieces of gold his way, and this only made him upset. Trying over again, this time I started hurling lots of money his way, and his disposition only yo-yoed between 33 and 43. It would be a lot easier to just make a charm spell, but I think because my character was loaded with so many septums, tossing a couple hundred or even a couple thousand around didn't really affect my purse a whole lot. Finally, Grosham began talking and filled me in on what he's learned. He calls the king paranoid and is getting tired of looking into conspiracies weekly, but says that this time, the plot against the royal family is true. Apparently, there's going to be an attempt made on Queen Barilzar's life. Grosham finds this really strange though, as she doesn't have any known enemies within Mournhold. Returning back to Helsith, he says that his other sources are suggesting the same idea, and that the attack will happen tomorrow night. Helseth wants to play this out strategically though. In order to not attract too much attention, it's best to not have the royal guard involved. Instead, Helseth asks me to wait in the antechamber just outside of her room. I'm to wait behind the screens, closing all of the doors behind me. When it's time, I'm to protect the queen's life with my own. It certainly took me aback with how calm Helseth was. A plot against his mother, Queen Barilzar, practically beloved by most in Mournhold, and he's placing his trust in someone whom he recently tried to have killed. I suppose it's smart that I'm in charge of her protection instead of his, as he knows I'm going to try my hardest at keeping her alive. Still, I feel like this news should be a little more troubling to him. This was when I decided to pay a visit to Barilzar's friend, Platinius Marrow. Marrow had a lot of interesting dialogue prompts to him. He certainly could have offered me a lot of fascinating insight into several different matters. Choosing to stay on task though, Marrow confirmed that something smells fishy with this whole assassination plot. He too can't think of anyone who would wish her harm. Marrow tells me to heed caution on this one, as he suggests that the king isn't above putting his own mother in harm's way, if only to test the loyalty of his subjects. This certainly only makes me more suspicious of Helseth and could explain why he was seemingly unbothered by a plot against his own mother. Making my way to Barilzar's chambers, I spoke with her in order to see how she felt about all of this. She didn't really say much other than she wasn't concerned by it. Closing all of the doors and forcing a wait behind the screens, I received a journal update.
Supposed to be here somewhere. He told us in the Queen Mother's chamber behind the screen. Let's see what you're made of.
3 members of the Dark Brotherhood spotted me and began their attack. They got the better of me as I wasn't expecting them to be that tough of a fight. Trying again, I killed one off instantly using a destruction spell and then worked on the other 2 with my spear. Their dialogue and actions were more than weird. They shut off the lights and stumbled around in the room looking for something. They then said to look behind the screens, which was exactly where the king told me to wait for them. There were too many coincidences and strange opinions for this not to be a setup from the king. I don't know if this was something meant to be looked into or not, but all of his assassins were seemingly Imperials, or at least were part of the human race. In the past, all Dark Brotherhood assassins were Dark Elves, so this was definitely something that caught my attention. Returning to the Queen, she continued to be unfazed by the plot against her. I don't know if she would be in on the plan to test my loyalty, or if she was just used as a pawn in her son's weird games. Something else I thought of is that so far, the King is the only NPC I know of who uses the services of the Dark Brotherhood. So I wonder if there's something to that as well. Running back to the throne room, King Helseth seemed unenthused about foiling the attempt against his mother, even going as far as to say that the threat was unlikely that great to begin with. He rewards me with Helseth's Collar, which fortifies sneak and security for 10 points, and fortifies speed for 5 points. With that, thus ends the quest, an assassination attempt. Before continuing onwards, I had to go and get my gear repaired, mainly the boots of blinding speed as they were broken, and at this point they were definitely a vital part to my build. I had forgotten what it was like to be slow in this game, and boy is it brutal. Paying a visit to Darren and dumping some gear along the way, I decided to head down into the bazaar sewers in order to replenish all of my bars. Soon, I was ready to report back to the king. Helseth said that I had proven myself in the eyes of the throne, but have yet to prove myself to him. He has big plans for me, and it's almost time to get them moving forward. Inquiring about how I could be of further assistance, Helseth said that those in his inner circle must be strong and powerful. His personal bodyguard, Karrod, is the best and most loyal fighter that he's ever seen. Helseth met Karrod many years ago, when the Red Guard was apparently just a little boy, deaf and daft. After Karrod's attempted robbery, the royal family decided to take him into their employ. Helseth said that he wants me to duel Karrod. This is because, according to Helseth, the plans that he has set out for me involve both brawn and brain. If I'm able to defeat Karrod and mark myself as the best warrior in the employ of the Royal Guard, Helseth will know I'm ready. I'm to return tomorrow for the battle. Making the mistake of wanting to get straight into it, I forced the 24-hour wait and went directly to the king. Helseth commends me for returning and drops the fact that Karrod has never been bested in battle before. He says that we're able to use any weapons or spells available. Exiting the conversation, the throne room clears out and it's just me and the Red Guard. Attempting to speak with him, he says nothing back. I get the first cheap shot in with casting my most powerful destruction spell. It appears to drop his health to around half, and Karrod charges in. I kited him around the room a bit, which again was a big mistake. He knocked me down a few times before I got some hits in with my spear. This was when I noticed that he had some form of health regen. His HP was already much higher than before, and every hit with my spear seemed to get healed right away. Fortunately, he didn't hit incredibly hard, but I knew this attempt was going to end in my failure. Any time spent not attacking meant my progress was getting negated. After some feeble attempts at trying to stay in the fight, Karrod delivered the killing blow. I tried to leave in order to restock on some potions, but the doors were locked and Karrod came rushing in. If I had the ability to cast my most powerful destruction spell twice, I knew I could win this fight. The issue was that I didn't have any more Restore Magicka potions. Restarting the fight one more time, I let off my spell and kept him busy with my spear. When ready, I popped every single one of my Fortify Magicka potions and enchantments. For some reason, I cast my less powerful destruction spell instead of the one that would have likely killed him. Fortunately, it did get him down to around 1/4 health, and I was fairly certain I could close out the fight from here. I poked and prodded with my spear, fighting for dear life against his insane health regen. With a smidgen of health left, Karrod spoke up and surrendered. He called me the Greater Warrior and permitted me to speak again with the king. Doing so, Helseth says he could hardly believe that I won. On top of that, he's never heard Karrod speak before. He says that I've proven myself to him and gifts me his father's ceremonial dagger, saying that we can now discuss plans for me. Taking a look at the dagger of Symmachus, it fortifies the skill of Shortblade and the attribute of Endurance for 10 points. It also has the enchantment of Reflect for 10%. With that, thus ends the quest, Helseth's Champion. Speaking again with King Helseth, I ask him what his plans are for me. He gives me a speech about how the Tribunal has a massive presence in Mournhold and how Almalexia oversees everything here. Helseth admits to not having much love for the Tribunal and wishes me to gather a little more information on them. Due to my intel provided before, the Royal Palace knows that the Fabricants aren't Dwemer in nature. They believe them to be the work of a god. Helseth believes that Almalexia knows more about these creatures than she lets on. He states that they must be creations of Sothasil, the third member of the Tribunal. The king wants me to gain the trust of the goddess, so that way I can learn more about the recent attacks. Until then, I shouldn't be spotted in the palace's inner circle so as to not draw attention on myself. Asking a little more about Sothasil, Helseth calls him a tinkerer, and that no one has seen him in centuries. The first part is new information to me, and it certainly does push him further along as a suspect. Exiting the royal palace, I returned back to the high chapel and spoke again with the goddess. She greeted me and said that upon Phaedrus's recommendation, there's more work that I can do for her. Inquiring about it, she says that since the attacks on Mournhold, other disturbing events have occurred. Among them is the rise of a cult called the End of Times. The cult is led by a Dunmer named Enno Ramari. Enno resides somewhere here in Mournhold, yet has no permanent residence. According to Almalexia, he spreads misinformation and must be dealt with, but not killed. When asked about the End of Times cult, she says that not much is known about them, except that recently, a few of them have been found dead. 7 have been discovered in their homes. Apparently, their death was caused by some form of ingested poison. She wants me to figure out what their endgame is and ultimately get rid of them. Almalexia directs me over to Marilyn Othin in the Great Bazaar, as her brother Seville was a recent victim to the cult's games. Exiting the conversation, I made my way over to the Great Bazaar and located Marilyn. Fortunately, she didn't need any convincing. She talked right away and told me that the cult is destructive, heretical, frightening, and suicidal. More and more members are popping up over the city, and they mostly spend their time around the Winged Guar. Enno Ramari also spends his time there. Making my way over to God's Reach, I spot an NPC I've never seen before, standing just outside of the tavern. Approaching, it's Enno, the leader of the End of Times cult. He introduces himself and asks how he can help me. I inquire about the cult, and Enno says that they're a peaceful group. They're dedicated to relieving the suffering of those affected by these hard times. He speaks of how the near future holds troubles and hardships for all, and that his followers are taught the way of enlightenment. Many of them are willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater cause. Pressing further, Enno says that the cult's beliefs are rather simple. He knows that the Tribunal's power is waning. He suggests that when the three of them pass on, the next era will begin. The followers of the cult are preparing for this exact occasion. Enno says that the cult believes that the end of this era will bring many changes. Gates to Oblivion will open, and Daedra will roam the lands of Tamriel. There are some who might say that this is a good and necessary change, but the cult knows better. Enno says that the Daedric princes must not be trusted, and that they will only bring destruction and change. The only ones who can be trusted are the true ancestors, aka the Aedra, and they will offer us their protection. He then mentions that the followers perform a ritual called the Cleansing. They quote-unquote relieve themselves of their worldly burdens and troubles, passing on to the next life in order to prepare the ancestors for what's to come. While doing research for a whole separate video, I had actually come across Enno's dialogue and noticed how crazy the foreshadowing is here. I love the idea that players back in the day would have just passed on those words as crazy. Obviously, a lot of it is, but his predictions for the end of times was spot on, and it was a very clever way for Bethesda to leak some plot points for Oblivion. Returning back to Almalexia, she's insulted that the End of Times cult would even question her power. She vows to teach them a lesson and tells me that I'm going to be her agent. Since most of her power has been used on securing and tending to the city, she can't divert it to other matters. But since they mocked the power of a god, her idea involves me traveling back down to the ruins of Bamz-Amschend and activating something called the Karstangsbeharn. This machine, loosely translated to Weather Witch, was used by the Dwemer in times of drought to bring rain. Since the ruins have opened up, Almalexia's suspicions of its existence have been confirmed. I'm to find this machine and activate it. It has the power to create ash storms, similar to those in which I saw on Vardenfell. In doing this for her, she suggests it will teach the heretics a lesson to not underestimate a god. She hands me an item called the Power Dwemer Cohere and says that it's needed to turn the machine on. She trusts that I will figure out the rest from there. I do find it pretty ironic that she really wants to prove her godly strength, but can only do so by using a Dwemer creation. I thought for sure that King Helseth would want to know about Almalexia's plans, but he instead shooed me away, insisting that we still couldn't be seen together. So I just made my way over to the plaza and descended into Bamz-Amschend. Overlooking Hearthfire Hall, no new enemies spawned in and the way forward was cleared. I ventured into the Passage of Whispers where I encountered more Dwemer machines. The Centurion archers packed a punch with their darts, so I made a note not to let them get any cheap shots in. There were multiple entrances into other zones for this area, including one that was blocked off by some rubble. I moved along, fighting some dwarven spiders and steam centurions until finally arriving at Radek's Forge. There were a few more enemies in here, as well as multiple different passageways. I stumbled across a door that was secured by a level 100 lock. Using a spell to open it, it contained multiple chests with some pretty valuable treasures. Among them was 2 Dwemer satchel packs. I didn't know what they were used for at first, but upon getting closer to the areas blocked off by rubble, I noticed a new prompt. I was able to place the satchels on them as charges. Doing so, a countdown started and I backed away. This blasted through the rocks and opened up to the passage of the Walker. Within this zone, I came across and blasted through another passageway leading to a spot called Norenendur. This area was revealed to be Daedric in nature, and it tipped me off that I've stumbled a bit too far. Returning back to the Passage of the Walker and venturing further into it, I faced off against more Dwemer Centurions, which again proved to be pretty easy opponents. It had so many different areas cut off by fallen rocks, and it made me wonder if I had wasted the second satchel charge, as I was struggling to find more. Deciding to just continue onwards, I found a door leading to an area called the King's Walk. The King's Walk was brief and contained a few enemies. At the end of it, there was a door leading to the Skybreak Gallery. The gallery was this magnificently made area, with blue lights and a big machine at its center. Oddly enough, it reminded me a bit of a Kulakan's chamber in Dagoth-Ur. Approaching the giant machine, I found a Dwemer junction box which took the powered cohere as an energy source. This allowed me to adjust some Dwemer levers just in front of it. I got lucky in that the first one I pulled on gave me a journal update. I didn't realize that right in front of the levers, there was a panel that showed which weather effect the Karstang's Behorn would push forward. Leaving the Dwemer ruins with no trouble, I ascended back up to the plaza and experienced the dust storm firsthand. It felt exactly as it did back on Vvardenfell. Something else I thought of before is that these ash storms are going to affect everything and everyone here in Mournhold. This goes beyond just punishing the cult. It punishes even those who are faithful to the Tribunal. Returning back to Almalexia, she thanks me for my efforts and says that her magic prevents anyone from being able to change the weather back. She tells me to keep quiet about what I did and assures me that her powers are a bit drained but not gone. She closes off by saying her ordinators are going to take care of the End Times cult and that the ash storms will only stop when these people have learned their lesson. Looking at my journal, my character expresses their concern for the life here on Vvardenfell and that these ash storms will hopefully end sooner than later. With that, thus ends the quest, A Show of Power.